Welcome, League Esports fans, to another episode of the No FFs podcast. We have a special episode in store for you today. We're getting ready to get into another season of the LCS. League Esports has already started in most regions around the world, and we're just waiting for North America to catch up like we always are. Today on this episode, I have a special guest. Some of you know him as Prime Time on Twitter. We have Chris Cheung with us. He is the runner of the Primetime Twitter account, as well as the League of DFS podcast and videocasts. He has a YouTube channel, and he is all in on the fantasy world, on DFS. He's a huge League fan, and so I thought today we would get our intro into fantasy. If you've ever wanted to ask, how do I get into fantasy, especially with regards to League, this is the guy. And so I'm so excited to have him. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Zing. It's great to be here. Thank you for the intro. It's been a wild ride. I just started all of this last year, and now I've been able to find a lot of friends, and even had the pleasure of having you jump on to just kind of pick your brain on the LOL esports scene. So excited to be here tonight.
Absolutely. So like always, we're going to set a timer on ourselves. Not for Chris, but so to make sure that I don't ramble. So we're going to start with 15 minutes, and we'll see how fast we can hit it. All right. So the first question I have for you, Chris, is you've been, I've kind of noticed you starting to get into the League scene about a year ago with your podcast and your Twitter. Is that about right?
Correct. Yeah. Started off in the spring. I really got interested earlier. I followed 2017 Worlds, but didn't play. Got into it in 2018. Haven't looked back since. It was fun. It's a new way of playing and following League, and it definitely generated more interest in understanding the scene as a whole rather than just being a fan of a team. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
Tell us, was there like one specific tournament or one moment that like got you really excited about League of Legends esports that you watched and it was like, this is it?
Oh man, I think it has to be when, oh man, there's so many great moments, but you feel your heart pumping when you listen to a lot of the color caster. But I think the game that really got me hyped was RNG and against IG. I know that one came later in the year, but that one was like, oh, this is high quality. This is high quality, and fun, fast, filled, and yeah. So that would be the moment.
So you're kind of into the LPL a little bit.
It's fun to watch. I think last year especially you saw way more team fights. I'm not and then also learning what good what good LOL is. I know a lot of people put LCK more as the prime example or the golden example, but last year things started shifting. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, LPL teams had a lot of success. It was their most successful year and probably one of the most successful years for any region in terms of, how well they played in Worlds, MSI, all the other Rift Rivals, all the other tournaments. And then I wanted to ask you about the fantasy aspect. So how did you get into fantasy sports?
So I've been a long time daily fantasy sports kind of player, dabbled along the lines of football, which is my main primary sport. And then I saw DraftKings, this website offering League of Legends, which is interesting. No other esports was offered at this time, and still League of Legends is still the only one that's on that site. There are other sites right now with other different esports games, PUBG, Fortnite, things like that. But nothing is more fascinating than this League of Legends. And as I approach most fantasy, it's like a puzzle, and with the daily aspect, that means a way to different way to build a lineup, different way to construct it, and then you have to not only be good at numbers, you also have to watch the games, and it really just brought a lot of the joy that I had when I was playing fantasy football, and I found it in the same way in LOL esports.
That's great. I think a lot of us are familiar with Riot's old fantasy website that they shelved for this spring. Hopefully, rest in peace that, but hopefully we see a return before the summer. So I imagine that a lot of people will be interested in getting into DraftKings and the DFS scene, without that. And I think in a lot of ways it's kind of more exciting, right? Because you get more opportunity instead of like locking into a lineup at the beginning of the season, and then if a player doesn't pan out, you're kind of hosed. You get to continually play and you get to update, and depending on how things change or how your view of the meta of the leagues change, you can kind of you develop a new strategy. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. Because of the changing meta, because of the changing ways that players need to adapt, I think this League Esports, it fits a daily fantasy type of format better than a season long one where you're kept the same team. Maybe you make a drop here and there, but all in all, you won't get to own the guy that benefits the most. For example, when they made big changes to the jungler last year, you're stuck with yours, or you have to pick up
Got
one
it.
that's like more inferior. But in a daily kind of format, you're just finding the best one with the best matchup, and then it's a puzzle, like I mentioned. So that's why I think the it's more fun that way.
Got it. Got it. So for some of our viewers or listeners that aren't as familiar with daily fantasy, how does it work? I mean real money can be at play here, right? You can actually win money versus the other players in tournaments that you enter.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to explain it is you have 50,000. Like this is a fake salary. It's just called a salary cap, and each night, each week, they would release what they call a slate. That means how many games are played in that day or night, and each players are assigned a certain value to them, and the value matches up to how well these players um, perform over the course of the season.
Okay.
Excuse me. And then naturally, you can't just fit all this and stack all the strong ones. You can't just have a full team of Royal Never Give Up, a full team of Invictus Gaming, because A, the salary doesn't permit it, and B, they allow you only to have up to four members of the same team um, to have at the same time. So now you're trying to figure out what the best way is to stay under the cap, find the best players, and be able to beat out your opponent. You can play free. You can play for cash. I typically just every night is I play no more than $10, and the return, it could be great night, or it could just be a losing night, which either way, it's fun. I like the aspects of just finding the best team and incorporating all the different types of research that we do. And just the other fun aspect, of course, is just talking to others who also play this game, and they
Yep.
all discuss ways to bounce ideas, bounce strategies. How do I build the lineup? How do I make a different one? How do I figure out what's the most popular one out there? And so it really is unique in that way.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's a new way to get engaged in League Esports, like you said, with like-minded people who are passionate about it. I like the fact that you can make a bet. Like you can
Yeah.
you can say, I think there's an upset potential here. These players are undervalued, and rather than just going to Reddit or Twitter and saying, hey, this is what I think, and then you happen to be right, you happen to be wrong. Nobody knows. Like nobody cares because no one's
Right.
keeping track. There's no score. You can actually say, well, I'm gonna draft this guy to my roster and put my money where my mouth is, and we'll see me against you whose roster does better.
Yeah, exactly. And that aspect, you get to play with a different size too. You have 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, or maybe just a head-to-head. Any type of format you would like, and you just find what fits you the best. And if you're good at it, you earn a little cash on the side. Or if you want to play for fun, that's good, great too.
Got it. Got it. I wanted to ask you, you've played this for about a year now. What
Mhm.
kind of things, you talked about solving the puzzle. Now, don't reveal too much of what makes your strategy unique, but I know you're giving advice to a lot of our newer players as well. What kind of things have you learned about playing fantasy esports that's different than, just watching the game? Or what kind of tricks do you think are really helpful for new players looking to get into this?
hmm So one of the thing that I think was most beneficial, of course, is to look at betting odds. Even if you're not a sports bettor, or even if you're not one into the betting scene, it tells you what the public opinion is about a team. Who do they think will
Got
win?
it.
And then sometimes
Do you have a site
you
that you
can.
use that you like a lot for that?
I think Bovada, Bovada. That's a very popular one. I think that's even how DraftKings determine the salary for the player because they look
Okay.
at the odds,
So they
look
cover
at
League of
the
Legends as well.
yes, yes, they do. And now a lot of sites do too. Bet365, I think Pinnacle does it as well. But Bovada is the main one that I go to because it's free and it's always updated with all types of esports.
Got it.
Yeah, and the puzzle, of course, is um, sometimes it's easy to spot who the favorite are, and you want as much exposure of those players on your roster. But sometimes you can figure out, wait, even the bettors are not sure who's going to win. So there you have an opportunity to just say, oh, I'm going to pick the underdog. They are definitely going to be lower price, so that means I can formulate a very different roster than what I think the majority would have, and you win, and you can win big that way, or you can just beat your head-to-head opponent that way.
Yeah, so one thing I've noticed in some of the advice that you've given on Twitter is team stacking. So you pick specific teams that you think will do well, and then finding several players from that team that are either undervalued to their peers or just make sense and you think will score given the team's play style will score a lot of points in fantasy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so over the last year, we sort of experimented with so many different strategies, but we find that the best ones that had consistent success is the one where you just pick two teams and be exposed to as many of them as possible. Now, that strategy might still be viable, but this year DraftKings decided to change their format.
Yeah.
So they've took out two of the flex spot, and they added a spot where they call the captain spot, which is a multiplier, 1.5 multiplier. So now
Oh, okay.
you're just it allows for greater differentiation. So you might have the same exact team, but if your captain is different, it could mean the difference between the first place or the fifth place spot. And it is just crazy. It's more fun that way, I think, instead of being tied to everyone and then having to split the pot. Um, but the idea is still remains that if you can find yourself the team that will score the highest, we're looking for the bloodiest game out there, and
Okay.
be exposed to as many players as those. Kills is king. Kills are like touchdowns. Kills are like your goals in soccer and like hockey. So we're looking for that. And of course, the next thing is how much assists, because those are the stats that are tracked. Kills and assists combined makes for great value for your players.
Got it. Got it. So, the captain spot. I saw your tweet about that. Making it more interesting so you can assign value differently. Are there any other big changes from 2018 that players should be aware of?
Um, Not aside from the captain spot, no. Everything pretty much stayed the same. And we're begging DraftKings to at least bring back one of the flex spots. So that remains to be seen if they're willing to do so. They are
Got it.
also in an experimental phase, so they're open to feedback right now, and we're just excited that they're willing to invest a little bit more in this daily fantasy sport.
Got it. Got it. Um, we're kind of ending up near the end of our time. The last kind of question I had for you was, we've been through a week in most regions so far. What have you been playing fantasy so far this year? Have you already started?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely, that's
absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
I knew you would. What are the kind of the things, the global trends that you're seeing? I know you've done a bunch of previews. You saw previews on your YouTube channel talking about what you expect going into week one. What have you seen worldwide? Things that have jumped out at you or things that have surprised you?
Yeah, so that's another great point to bring up. Because of my involvement with LOL Fantasy, I've followed the major regions, including LCK and LPL, and that means just waking up in the middle of the night just to watch those games sometimes. Um,
Wow, getting
so
it
it,
live. I love it.
yeah, it's more exciting, and especially when you get to hear Papa Smithy's voice
Oh,
in the
sure.
morning. Yeah, that's one of the big things. But of course, that I suffered the next morning. So the trends that I'm seeing right now is everyone's adapting. Teams that are traditionally powerhouses are in a transition phase themselves. Kingzone is suffering from a big exodus of talent. We see KT Rolster, which was last year's
Yep.
favorite, They start off 0-2. So tonight, both those teams face off, see who
Mm-hmm.
will get their first win. But we also see a lot of the younger teams, Damwon Gaming, Sandbox, Griffin, or Griffin's not new, but those teams are the younger, more exciting ones, and they are actually having success right now in this current meta. I don't know if that's going to change in the upcoming patch, but not only them, we see this happening in China as well in the LPL region, where some of the more people that are elevated from the developmental league are finding themselves more success, which is bizarre to me because I had hoped that to see more consistency from year to year, but I guess that's not the case. Going over to Europe, we see a few shakeup as well there, and
Fnatic.
Fnatic, oh my gosh, 0-2. That cost me a lot this weekend.
Did it? Oh, wow.
Both times I went for Fnatic, and after the fact, I learned from my friends that they're like, "Yeah, we never thought that Fnatic would be doing well." I was like, "Why though? There's not that big of a change with the mid switching from Caps to Nemesis. Big loss, yes, but overall the core is the same. The
Mm-hmm.
patch didn't. I didn't feel like it changed too big from since Worlds." But of course, they introduced a lot more things since then. It's still at the same time. So perhaps everyone else around them is catching up. They lose to a team that is just formed, SK Gaming, and twice. Mind you, that the first week, Europe had to sort out a lot of bug issues, a lot of game delay. But both times when they had to remake the game against Fnatic, you see
Yep.
SK still routing them, and it's like, what's happening? So, but I'm not panicking yet on Fnatic. I think they had traditional slow start. We're hoping that they can adapt well. But G2 looks to take back their spot. They are. I don't know if I see anyone that can challenge them. Um, I'm not totally buying into Misfits yet. I know that's blasphemous to say. Uh, they
Oh,
they
interesting. I like it.
they really showed up really well, showed up fast. They played their style, but something tells me that at some point that's going to run out. Maybe it's just history. You know, traditionally, over the 2 years that I watched Misfits, always a great fast starter, flames out. But
Good point.
yeah,
It's a good point.
so we'll see on that point. That might be my one and only hot take for now. So yeah, those are what the observations of what happened this past week.
Hey, man, this is the No FFs podcast. We're all about hot takes. And with that, that was a great introduction to fantasy, daily fantasy for League Esports, and a great, look at the first week of around the world league action. I want to thank Chris one more time. Chris, how are we going to follow you? What's the best way to follow all the stuff that you're posting?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter is at prime_time with prime with a 3 at the instead of the E, and time
Yep.
is a 1 instead of the I, and a E 3 instead of the E. I know it's confusing. I might decide to change it at some point.
I think a lot of people like that handle, so you've had to be a little
Yeah.
creative.
Yeah. So I really, it's just harder to tell people how to find it,
Yeah.
but it's definitely great. At least I think so. And you can find me on my YouTube channel, just youtube.com /FFDynasty101. Uh, I'll also try to post things on SoundCloud and Twitch as well, but those are the main places where I'll be providing content for.
That was
But you can,
FF Dynasty, FF Dynasty 101.
yes, and
Okay.
that's an homage to my fantasy football dynasty days.
Oh, okay.
I'm still in it actually, but that's the channel I first created. That was the purpose of it. But now it's all League of Legends content, and I will continue to be posting those. I'll be covering just LEC and LCS. The I'll leave the LPL and LCK advice for my friends who are able to do the nightly grind. But once we hit the international events, I will of course be involved in that scene as well.
All right. Subscribe to this guy on YouTube. Follow him on Twitter. People watching this on YouTube, I've got his Twitter page up. It's League of Prime Time, PRIM, the number 3 _T, the number 1 M, the number 3. Follow him and support his work because he's a really good guy. Chris, thanks again. This was a great episode. My name is Zing Lee. I write for Esports. You can follow me on Twitter at Zing the Lee. and I will be back pretty soon with another episode because this is going to be fast. We're going to put up episodes most nights of the week. Thanks, guys.